Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce to all of you Congressman Ted Lieu. And this is part of our Know Your Rep series, which we have been putting together over the course of the last couple of years, an opportunity for us to really get to know some of those representatives at the city, state, and federal level who are the people who have much of the power to work to transform the policy areas that we care most about. And so we've been really working hard to build and develop these relationships with our incredible Minyancetic leadership, many of whom are here with us today. And we're thrilled that Congressman Liu has found the time to be with us. There's not much going on in the country right now, so I'm sure you were just looking for a way to spend your Monday afternoon. So thank you so much. We're so glad we can help you fill the time. So a word of introduction about Congressman Liu, and then we'll hear a little bit from him. And he and I will engage in a bit of dialogue together, and then we'll have a chance to ask some questions first from Minyancetic leadership, and then from others who are joining us for this call today. So Congressman Liu represents California's 33rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives. He is now serving his third term in Congress and sits on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Liu is a former active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force and currently serves as a colonel in the reserves. He really has established himself as a leader in many of the areas that I know many members of our community care deeply about, including the environment, cybersecurity, civil liberties, government ethics, and veterans. He's also been extremely outspoken in speaking out about and tackling climate change, and has been one of the leaders in Congress working against ethnic and racial profiling, working for racial justice, and fighting against discrimination in the LGBTQ community. We are really honored and thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you so much, Congressman Liu, for joining us. We look forward to hearing from you this evening.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Rabbi Browse, and thank you for your leadership. And I want to thank everyone being on this call today. I thought I would talk about 3 topics and then answer any questions that you may have. The first is the pandemic, and then I'll talk about the Justice in Policing Act, and then I'll talk about essentially voting in November. So in terms of the pandemic, Congress has passed 4 bipartisan laws to address the pandemic. We put in a number of provisions, including billions of dollars to find a cure, either through a drug therapy or a vaccine. We've mandated that testing has to be free. We put in provisions for emergency medical and sick leave. We've had stimulus checks go to American families, small business loans through the Paycheck Protection Program, and then we've had funds go to school districts, hospitals, local, city, and state governments. My view is everything we've done so far has been necessary, but not sufficient to address the scale of this pandemic. The president has said 18 times that this virus is just going to go away. There's no evidence of that. In fact, we see this virus surging in a number of states, including California. So I believe we need a second round of stimulus. So last month, the House passed the HEROES Act, which provides significant funds to local, state, and county governments, as well as school districts. It also has another round of checks going out to American families and a number of other provisions. And my view is we need to get that stimulus to American people. It is before the U.S. Senate, and I hope Senator McConnell will take that up soon. So while we're in the middle of this pandemic, we all saw the horrific murder of George Floyd. And my view is that it is not simply a matter of a few rogue cops. I believe it is an entire system that needs to be changed. We have, for decades, seen government murdering Black Americans. And I use the word government because, again, it's not just a few people. So I'll give you the example of George Floyd. It wasn't just one police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. There were an additional 2 officers that had their knees on his body, and a 4th that stood as a lookout. And then all of them had to be trained in procedures that obstructed people's airways. Then there was a Minneapolis Police Department spokesperson that gave an initial misleading account of what happened. And then there were the civilians and police officers who knew about Derek Chauvin's 18 misconduct claims and didn't take strong enough action. So it takes an entire village to allow for the persistent, systematic murder of Black Americans generation after generation. That's why you've seen so many people demonstrate in the streets. And that's why I'm very pleased that the Judiciary Committee on which I sit passed the Justice and Policing Act, and then the House passed that last week. That is a number of systematic reforms to police departments across the nation. It bans chokeholds. It requires training in racial bias and racial profiling. It bans no-knock warrants in drug cases. It reduces qualified immunity. It has a number of data transparency provisions. It creates a federal database of police officers who get complaints against them. So this is a systematic reform, and it's before the U.S. Senate. And again, hopefully we can get the U.S. Senate to take this bill up as well. And then we have, as all of you know, a national election this November. So we've seen incredibly long lines in some of these elections. And the bad news is it's unlikely that's going to change. There's 4.5 months before these elections. We have a conservative Supreme Court that gutted the Voting Rights Act. It's unlikely they're going to change their mind. You have a U.S. Senate that's hostile to voting rights protections because the House has passed a number of bills over to the Senate. They've not taken those up. And then you have a president who actively discourages mail-in voting. So my view of what we need to do is to get people to, I call it vote at home. I think that's more descriptive. You can call it mail-in voting, but we need to get people to vote by mail in those states that have it, and a number of states, in fact, do have it. A number of states also have early voting. So you can vote early to avoid these long lines. And then for people who just want to vote on election day or no other choice other than to go in person on election day, we just have to prepare them for long lines and mentally prepare them to wait in line and have them bring a chair or a board game or a meal or anything that'll allow them to stay in line and cast their vote. Because my view is you're going to have voter suppression happen, and you just have to overcome it. And to me, the best way is to prepare people for that. So with that, happy to answer any questions you may have, and thanks so much for having me on.
Okay, that's fantastic. You, of course, addressed a number of the things that I wanted to start with in our conversation today. So where to begin? You know, I think that what's of really great concern is that we see that the House is passing a number of measures that we know that the American people desperately need, and then it seems like the obstacle of the Senate means that those things are just the money, the stimulus money is not going to get into the hands of the people. We see that people are being evicted, that they're losing, they're losing or at risk of losing their homes. The businesses are collapsing. What if anything can be done to advance the work that you and your colleagues have done in the Congress to ensure that this can actually be bring actual change to the people who need it the most right now?
I think Abraham Lincoln had it right when he said that public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. So understand your power to shape public sentiment. Social media is free. If you write a post that resonates, maybe someone in Ohio will read it, or Kentucky. If you want to write letters to the editor, one day you'll get published. It's true that letters to the editor, there are a lot of them, and newspapers do get lots of people that write in. It's also true that oftentimes from the same people. So when you start writing in, eventually you'll be able to get in a newspaper and affect people's minds. So Senator Mitch McConnell early on said that he wanted states to go bankrupt. He then had to walk that statement back because he had bicameral and bipartisan pushback. And then recently he said something to the effect of, essentially, okay, we'll do one more round of stimulus and then that's it. So it looks like he's moving in the right direction. So we just have to keep pressure on the US Senate. A lot of these, well, actually every senator has local, county, and state governments that they have to deal with. And all of these governments are in a world of hurt because of their huge drop in revenues from the economic slowdown caused by this pandemic. And so there is a lot of pressure on these senators, and with every passing week, there's more pressure. And our hope is that at some point they will take the bill up, or at least offer their version of the second stimulus act, so that we can negotiate with them and get something to the president's desk.
Mm-hmm. I read today that there was a 5-fold increase that we've seen in cases, that cases are absolutely spiking right now in many parts of the country. And I've been thinking a lot about how this could have been handled had this pandemic not become part of the culture war that's unfolding in the country. And I wonder what you're seeing there. How is it playing out in the halls of power? Mask wearing, not wearing masks, the whole idea that it's political if we listen to public health and medical experts now. Can you talk a little bit about what you see from your vantage point there in Washington, right in the heart of things?
Sure. I think it's insane that people don't wear masks. I think it's insane that the President of the United States appears to actively discourage the wearing of masks. Now, the good news is you see people now breaking away from that. So yesterday, Vice President Pence actually basically came out and said it's a good idea to wear masks. And then today, months into this pandemic, finally, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wrote a statement they put on Twitter that basically said, wear masks. So you're starting to see, I think, a shift away from the president, because it's just based on science. Every study shows that if we had everyone wear masks, we could significantly reduce the transmission of COVID-19. And it's a pretty simple reason why. This virus is spread through respiratory droplets. And well, guess what stops that? Masks do, and they keep your own respiratory droplets from going all over the place. So we're seeing, I think, more and more Republican elected officials come on board with wearing masks, and I think that's a good thing. We have to have people social distance, and then we just need to have people listen to Dr. Fauci and other medical experts and the CDC and the Surgeon General instead of politicians. Because if you listen to them, then everyone would social distance, wear masks, and not go into indoor crowded areas if they don't have to. So unfortunately, a lot of people didn't do that the last month or more. And I think that's one reason we had a spike in these cases.
Right, and we're seeing now in both Florida and Texas a kind of rollback of some of the effort to reopen as they realize just how dangerous this thing still is. And so one of the things that I'm really concerned about as just a rabbi and a human being is the sense that some people in our society are simply expendable, that if we lose a certain amount of people and certain kinds of people, well, that's okay to keep the economy rolling. And so I wonder how you make that calculation in your own mind. I mean, obviously people want businesses to reopen, and we want people to be able to make a living and to be able to pay their bills. And at the same time, really human life is on the line. How are you guided in your thinking about that dynamic?
Yeah. I don't want to use the word insane too much, but I think it is insane that you essentially have the president suggesting that some people are expendable. I think that's why his approval ratings are really low among senior citizens, who many have abandoned him because their view is they are not expendable. And what I think we see happening is there's a difference between people who say things in the media and what the American people actually think. So poll after poll shows that the overwhelming majority of Americans are concerned about their health and the health of their loved ones, and that they prioritize not getting this virus over reopening. And more Americans were concerned and are concerned about reopening too soon than reopening too late. And what we see now are the states that reopen too soon having to ratchet back. And that's unfortunate. It's also, it was completely preventable because we saw what other countries did. And we just had to follow, what South Korea did or some other countries did, and we wouldn't be in this situation that we are in. Now, the good news is with every passing week, we do learn more about this virus. There have been some drugs that have been found to have some effect on the virus. So Gilead has a drug called remdesivir that has been shown to shorten the stay of a person in the hospital if they take this. And then a common steroid drug was found to have essentially prevented about a third of the deaths of the very sickest COVID patients who are on ventilators. There is a little bit of good news in terms of the drug therapies that are being discovered. And with what we're trying to do essentially is buy time, right? If you can get people to social distance, wear masks, slow the spread down, then we're buying time so that we can finally either get a cure or additional drug therapies that will make this virus less lethal than it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to switch gears to talk about the second topic that you brought up, which is about policing and racial justice and so much of what we've all been consumed with over the past month and some of us over the past many years. It feels to me that this is a moment of genuine change and transformation, we see it in the number of people around the country who now say that they support Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter has a far greater approval rating than the president does. But that used to be a very controversial statement in some quarters. And now I'm getting requests from rabbinic colleagues who are very conservative people to join them in putting out statements saying Black Lives Matter. And I feel like my heart is lifted. And my sense is that this is reaching people in a different way in this moment. And I wonder if you can reflect a little bit. Obviously there's the Justice and Policing Act and the great hope that something with some teeth to it passes in the Senate. But does it feel to you that this is a moment of genuine change, or is this going to be a moment of kind of tweaking and slight reform, and then people are going to lose interest and the next thing is going to come? Because you know that Americans have a very short attention span, and we like to move from one thing to the next. And for some reason, this is stuck for a few weeks. But do you sense that something real is happening here?
I do, and it's not just the polling; it's also in the number of days of these large demonstrations. And it's still ongoing. Chicago just had a pretty massive demonstration. The news media hasn't really covered a lot of these demonstrations lately because of other things that are happening, such as this allegation that Russia placed bounties on, the killing U.S. troops.
I want to talk about that too.
Right, but you still have a lot of people who are still demonstrating. And I think when Black Lives Matters first came out, a lot of people didn't quite understand what that term meant. They would just respond with, all lives matter. Well, of course, all lives matter. But the reason I think that people still now get it is when they saw the murder of George Floyd, something clicked in their minds that now I understand why people say Black Lives Matter, because the system does not, in fact, treat lives the same way. It treats Black lives less important. And that's why you've had this persistent, systematic murder of Black Americans by our government. And I think people sort of always understood what that phrase meant, why people were saying it. And that's why we had this Justice and Policing Act, is to make sure that Black lives matter. And if you look at the data, Black Americans are twice as likely to get killed by police compared to white Americans. So that's just, again, not an issue of just a few rogue cops. That is an entire system that needs to be changed. And we see not just Congress acting, but a number of cities who are also acting. So I think it is a moment of genuine change in America.
Something that I care deeply about and have been working on for several years is advancing the conversation on reparations. Do you believe that this is a moment in which Congress could really take this on? Because it seems to me that this isn't only about policy changes, and it's not only about statues coming down and even military bases being renamed, but it's actually about a true reckoning that has to happen from the bottom up and from the top down. And so is that something that is in the conversations that you're having with colleagues now as a real possibility?
Yes, it's not going to happen under this president, but if the voters put in a new administration and a new Senate, I could absolutely see that happening. Right now, we are focused on the police reform, but if the voters do put in a new administration in November, I do think that is definitely an issue that could happen.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of interest in my racial justice circles and folks in the movement for really that America needs to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that we need to begin to do the deeper spiritual work of acknowledging where the foundations of the country lie, and why it is that we end up with George Floyd with an officer's knee on his neck. And so I'm hoping that we're laying some of the foundation for that now with the work that you're doing, and then hopefully perhaps in the coming administration there will be some space for those kind of conversations. You mentioned the Russians, the evidence now that Russians have been taking out bounty on our soldiers, and I know that you're on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Can you just talk a little bit about that? That was absolutely astonishing news for many of us to read on I think it was Saturday morning, to pick up the paper and read that, and then to learn that the president and the administration had known about it for many months, and he has taken no action against that at all. Can you talk a little bit about what you see from your vantage point?
Sure. So the New York Times reported on Friday that Russia had a bounty program where they would pay militants who killed U.S. troops in Afghanistan. That report was then confirmed by the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, CNN, NBC News, a number of other press outlets. And then the administration didn't say anything for 24 hours. And then the first thing they said was essentially the president was not briefed on this, which is sort of shocking. You'd wonder why something this explosive he wouldn't have been told. And then today, so then we get conflicting stories. So the director of national intelligence at the time was Richard Grenell. This alleged evidence of Russian bounties came into the U.S. around March, sometime in the March time period, and he was the director of national intelligence. He actually responded to me on Twitter and flatly denied he ever heard of this allegation. So that's what he's saying. Then all of a sudden the administration says, well, okay, the president wasn't briefed on it. Well, those are two very different things, right? I mean, one person saying essentially the Russians didn't do this. And then the administration basically said, well, we're not denying the allegation, we're just saying the president didn't know. So we're just trying to get to the bottom of this to figure out what did the president know, and when did he know it? Also, what actually is their program the Russians were doing, and in fact, was this bounty program happening? I tend to believe it is, because not only did multiple press reports in the U.S. confirm it, the UK also confirmed that program as well. So that's where we are. So we're still trying to get information from the administration. Today, I wrote a letter with Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan. We're both on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We both previously served on active duty. We wrote a letter to Secretary Pompeo asking him a series of questions about whether this program in fact exists, and second, what diplomatic channels has he used to convey to the Russians that they can't do this, and also how does this affect the Afghanistan peace plan that the administration has tried to put into place.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the fight for DC statehood? This was, I mean, it seems like as now that we have stipulated that you and I both see this as a moment of potentially a moment of genuine change happening in the country, there are a number of fundamental changes, like DC statehood, like potentially increasing the number of justices on the Supreme Court, like potentially addressing the problems with the Electoral College that have been pipe dreams for many for years, but now they seem to be advancing. How did the conversation around DC statehood reach a fevered pitch in the past couple of days?
So we had a historic vote last week. For the first time ever, one chamber of Congress passed a DC statehood bill. I was proud to have supported that legislation. Unfortunately, the Republican-controlled Senate is not going to pass that. If the voters change the Senate in November in the White House, then it is possible we could get DC statehood. So keep our fingers crossed, but that's where we are right now.
How optimistic are you that the election in November will be anything close to a free and fair process?
That's a great question. So we don't actually have a national election. We've got 50 states, and each state has their own Secretary of State, and then we have all these local election officials, all these precincts, and so on. So the good news is it's really hard to systematically hack that or to sort of influence it in any systematic way. Now, the bad news is because there's so many people involved and so many different election officials, you could get screw ups in various places. So that's what we've always had, and we're going to have that again in November. Hopefully, we're going to get less screw ups than we have in the past. I know that our FBI and Homeland Security officials are very aware that foreign powers may try to influence this election, so they're going to do what they can to protect voting machines. Again, it's hard to essentially access a voting machine, have it all to yourself, and then hack it in sort of real time. So, and also because we have such a messy election system, it's hard to systematically hack a lot of voting machines. So I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about what I would call psychological operations. The Russians were quite good at this in 2016. They engaged in a sweeping and systematic attack on our elections, and they would do fake posts on social media. They would do things to trick Americans into believing that something was being written by, an American when it was actually coming from the Kremlin. That's much harder to stop because we have a free and open society. The good news is that more and more Americans now are much more suspicious of what they read on social media. And to me, that's a good thing. And I think in 2016, many Americans sort of caught off guard. I think people are now much more aware that what they read on social media may or may not be true. And what you're going to have going to this November is lots of people from all sides, from all different campaigns, flooding social media, instead of just having sort of one side primarily do it in 2016. So that's what we're going to have, and we'll see what happens.
Are you not concerned that the seeds are being planted right now by the president fairly regularly, that whatever the election results are, should they be unfavorable to him, that he'll call it that the election was manipulated? I mean, it seems like talking about all of the voter fraud and mail-in ballot fraud, which of course evidence shows that there's been very little voter fraud over the course of the years. It seems that there's a case that's being made so that whatever the outcome is in November, it can be seen as ultimately advantageous to one party over the other.
Yes, he's absolutely doing that. He's going to keep saying that. Now, he also said that in last election when he lost a popular vote. He said, millions of legal, in his words, illegal aliens voted. And then he set a whole commission to investigate, and then that commission disbanded because they found nothing. So it's something he's been, saying since he's campaigned for the presidency. So he's going to keep saying this. Not clear to me how much American people actually believe it. And so we'll see what happens in November. We can't stop him from saying it. All we can do is hope that these 50 secretaries of state run their elections as best as they can. And whether you're a Republican or a Democratic secretary of state, you don't want your elections messed up. I mean, one of your primary jobs as secretary of state is to run a free and fair election. And so these secretary of states, including Republicans, have been trying to work very hard to have free and fair elections. And you have a number of Republican secretaries of states that are doing vote by mail ballots because they believe it's just the right thing to do. And so I do have hope in these election officials that they're all going to do the right thing.
Right. I hear that. I know that many of us are still reeling from the trauma of the 2000 elections, which seem to, to never end. And we obviously feel the ramifications of the way that that unfolded for decades. And so we want to know if there is something that Congress can do to help protect these elections. And I've even heard some people talk about calling in an international force to observe the elections, the way the U.S. often stands as as part of an international force to observe elections in other places where we doubt that they'll be held with integrity.
I wouldn't oppose that. I do know that the various campaigns are or always have had lawyers who go monitor election sites and do file lawsuits if they see voter suppression and other things happening. And my sense is that'll be beefed up even more in November. So it's an intriguing thought. I wouldn't oppose an international body. So let me look into that.
Okay, I would love to open it up to some of the leadership of our Minyan Tzedek, of our justice work in the community. And I'm going to start by turning it over to Sam Bampong, who I think will have our first question for you this afternoon.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you, Rabbi, for leading that amazing discussion. My name's Sam Bimpong, and my question is that the federal government has been pretty slow to respond to the needs of most communities of color. In fact, much of the federal spending that was passed in the initial days of the pandemic went to well-resourced companies and not to those suffering most from the health and economic effects of COVID-19. What can Congress do to provide not only support for healthcare, but also rent and mortgage relief and extended unemployment assistance beyond the July 1st cutoff, as well as small business support that actually reaches those who need it most?
Thank you for your question. So in terms of rent, the HEROES Act has a fund in it to help renters. And then in terms of unemployment insurance, the HEROES Act extends it to January of next year. It's set to expire towards the end of July. And so that's why we need to get the HEROES Act through. And then your question about small business, the primary vehicle was the Paycheck Protection Program. So when it first launched, a number of businesses got these paycheck protection loans, but it also turned out that a number of businesses got them because they had connections to banks and to well-established banks. So a number of small businesses didn't have those relationships. So that's why Democrats actually, you may have remembered, held out for quite a while when the Senate wanted to put additional funds into the Paycheck Protection Program because it was running out. And we were able to, because of us holding out, able to put in provision to carve out a section for CDFIs, for community development financial institutions, which were not these traditionally large banks, that did serve a lot of small businesses that did not get money in the first tranche. So the HEROES Act would continue that. If anyone has a small business or knows someone who has a small business and has problems with the Paycheck Protection Program or wants to get a loan or has other issues with the agency, please let me or my staff know. Aurelia on my staff is on this call and she can assist. So if anyone has any issues, please let me know.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn the next question over to Naomi Goldman.
Before Naomi speaks, just to say to everyone who's joined us today, and I know that we have a number of people with us on Zoom, and then this will also be on Facebook Live afterwards, and so we'll have lots of people hearing, and many now. If you do have a question, please feel free to write it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will hopefully get to as many of your questions as possible during the course of our time with the Congressman today. Naomi.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for your leadership and for joining us. Here's my question. California and every other state is facing devastating cuts to education, health and welfare, housing, and the very services that we need to recover. So what can we do to get the federal government to help bail out the states?
Thank you, Naomi, for your question. So the HEROES Act that the House passed last month has $1 trillion to help states, counties, local governments, and school districts. And my view is we have to get those funds out to these states and local governments because they're facing a huge revenue shortfall from this economic slowdown caused by the pandemic. If we don't do that, you're just going to start seeing layoffs pretty soon of first responders, of teachers, of a lot of folks who are working very hard during this pandemic. So again, it's before the U.S. Senate. I think we just have to keep putting pressure on Senator McConnell and the U.S. Senate to take this bill up and to get it to the president's desk.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Adam Weissman, and I think I'm asking the next question. I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about the House Justice and Policing Act. What do you think the prospects are for that passing in the Senate? Is there any chance of compromise between the House and the Senate in this session? And what do you think is possible in the next Congress to transform community safety in the U.S.?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. The Republicans did put out their own bill authored by Senator Tim Scott. So my view and the view of many in the Democratic caucus was that that bill was far too weak. However, the concepts were similar. And so that gives me hope. It's not like we're talking about two completely different things. And to me, because at least we're sort of in the same ballpark and we sort of seems like we sort of understand what the issues are, I do think we could get to a compromise. I also note that last term we passed the bipartisan First Step Act, and that was Democrats and Republicans coming together. It was criminal justice reform in terms of sentencing. Again, it's a first step. I think there's a lot more to be done, but this is an issue where you do get bipartisan support. And so I am hopeful we can get something done before November. Now, the House did not do the Justice and Policing Act as a messaging bill. Our intent is to get that into law. And so we're going to work very hard in the Senate to try to get that into law or a compromise version of it into law. If we can't do that before November, and if the voters flip the Senate and flip the White House, then you will see it next year become law.
Great. Thank you so much for a note of hope. And next, according to our research, you have not received any donations to your congressional campaigns from police unions and their political action committees. So we want to thank you for that. But we are asking every elected official and candidate we speak with in the next year to pledge not to take future donations, contributions, or endorsements from police, sheriffs, or prison guards unions. So we're wondering, would you be willing to join us in calling on your congressional colleagues to make the same pledge?
So thank you for that question. Let me look into it. I do have a different view. My view is not that police officers are bad people or that police unions are bad. I think it's a system that needs to be changed. I believe people who put on a uniform do know that they're risking their life to protect the public. When you call 911, you do, and you know, there's a crime happening, you do want police to show up and be professional and do their duty. So I don't have the view that somehow police unions or police officers are bad. I think the system is bad. And I think the system allows not only bad cops to do bad things, it also allows good cops to look the other way. And so that's what we're trying to change.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think Jody Utah has the next question.
Am I on? Am I on? Hi, Congressman. I'm Jody Utah. We met a couple of years ago with Howie Klein, worked on some projects together.
Yes,
It's very
Howie's
nice
great.
to see you. Yeah, yeah. My question is, what can we, members of ECAR, do to support your work?
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice of you. We're in a sort of new digital age where social media is free. And so if you like something that I'm doing or folks in Congress are doing, writing a social media post would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And again, letters to the editor are helpful. Letting my office or I know about issues is helpful as well. So for example, just let me tell you a little bit what it's like to be a member of Congress. We're in 2-year legislative cycles. Every 2 years, I vote well over 1,000 times. About 80 to 90% of those votes, I don't get a single phone call, email, fax, or meeting. So when you write in or email or call in or request a meeting, it forces me and my staff to focus on that issue and to go, well, why are we talking about this issue? What's so important about it? So just lobbying members of Congress is very important. So for example, most members of Congress, including me, did not walk around thinking about bail. It's not an issue that most of us encounter or deal with, but a constituent a few years ago came to me and said, have you looked at our bail system? And I had it. And she said, you should look into it. And I did. And what I discovered was pretty horrific. I didn't realize that on any given day, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are sitting in jail or prison, not because they've been convicted of anything, but because they can't pay the fee to leave. And to me, it has a huge disproportionate impact on the poor and on people of color. Studies also show that people who can't pay their fee to leave also plead guilty at much higher rates simply so they could leave. And it turns the presumption of innocence on its head. So I started authoring legislation on bail reform. And it's because someone came up to me and told me to look into it. So please feel free to do that and let me or my office know if there are issues we should look into.
Thank you. That's very constructive. I'm going to hand it off to Brooke, who will be taking some questions from the audience.
Hi, Representative Liu. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Brooke Ward Chapter. I'm the Director of Community Organizing here at ECAR. And I'm going to pull some questions, as many as I'm able to, from our Q&A to ask you from members of our community. So Tony Gittleson writes in, he says, Attorney General William Barr's effort to politicize the Justice Department is, of course, deeply troubling. This could become even more dangerous as we approach the November elections. How confident are you in Congress's ability to keep Barr in check and exercise their oversight?
That's a great question. So I'll answer in two ways. The House Judiciary Committee, we have opened an investigation on Bill Barr. And so we want to know if what he has done goes beyond just unethical to potentially criminal. So we had a hearing last week with whistleblowers from the Department of Justice. We're doing additional interviews. We're requesting documents, and we're going to go through this investigation. At the same time, we've seen the Trump administration basically obstruct congressional subpoenas. Witnesses have failed to appear. Witnesses have failed to provide documents. So today, I introduced legislation along with other members of the Judiciary Committee to put in inherent contempt. So inherent contempt is a power that Congress has always had. It allows us to impose penalties on individuals that don't comply with congressional subpoenas. It was last used shortly before World War II. My bill would allow any committee of the House to impose an initial fine of up to $25,000. And you can impose further fines with a maximum cap of $100,000 for witnesses who do not appear before a committee under subpoena or who don't provide documents. And this is a rules change to the House rules to allow us to execute this power. So the US Senate can't block it. The president doesn't have to sign this. It simply requires a majority vote in the House, and then we can start imposing these fines. And so I think this would give us another tool to get Bill Barr and other officials to comply with congressional subpoenas.
Mhm. Thank you. We have another question. Sylvia would like to know, we know that historically the Republicans have been laser focused on the judiciary as a way of significantly impacting a conservative agenda for our country for the long term. Democrats have not done, I'm sorry, I lost where I was there. Just give me one second. Sorry. Democrats have not done a good job staying focused on long-term strategies. Now many are beginning to ask that courts at every level become a top priority, both in the short and long term, and the Democrats work at staying focused on long-term policy strategies. What is your view on this?
I think it's absolutely right. For whatever reason, Republicans have been much more focused on nominating and confirming federal judges. If the voters change the administration of the White House in November in the US Senate, my hope is that you'll have a focus by President Biden on nominating federal judges, and that the US Senate will confirm them quickly. So we'll see what happens in November.
Thank you. And Marsha's asking, if you were asked to advise Vice President Biden as to his choice of running mate, would you prefer to see a current member of Congress give up their respective seat, or a non-national government person with experience, regardless of sex or racial identity? What do you think? Who should he choose?
Many of the leading candidates are friends of mine, so I think they'll all be great.
Good answer. Deborah's asking, are you seeing any shifts with your Republican colleagues that GOP legislatures are more willing to work with Democrats? Do you think that Republicans know that they're in trouble in the election in November?
So there's two things happening. Before I went to Congress, I thought, oh, they just fight a lot. So now that I'm in Congress, it is true we fight a lot. It's also true that a fair amount of legislation, at least before this pandemic, was getting passed on a bipartisan basis. And you don't know about it or read about it for the same reason that you don't read about planes that land. It doesn't sell newspapers, it isn't exciting TV. So I think there is sort of a skewed view that nothing's happening, when in fact there was a fair amount of legislation that was being passed in both chambers on a bipartisan basis that the president was signing into law. Now it's also true, we do fight on a lot of significant issues, and that's the same that it's always been. What has been disappointing to me is when the president either says something completely ridiculous or engages in a ridiculous policy, and you have silence from my Republican colleagues. And I found that to be greatly disappointing. We did see more Republicans stand up to the president last term. What ended up happening is they all lost their elections, either in the primary or in the general election. Many of them came from moderate districts, and the Democrats won those districts. So you ended up having a smaller Republican member of Congress this term, but many of them were sort of in more extreme districts. And I think what we're seeing now are a lot of true believers behind the president. You still do see some U.S. senators every now and then stand up to the president, but it's rare.
What, can I just ask a follow-up to that? What do you think, if the next session begins with a new president, how do you think that your GOP colleagues will adapt, and what are the prospects for working together in a future session with a different president?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the issue. So infrastructure, for example, is something that I think can get bipartisan support. And in fact, this week we're passing HR 2, major infrastructure package out of the House of Representatives. And so I think on infrastructure, we can get Republicans to negotiate and work with us. If it's going to be on something like the woman's right to choose, you're just going to have straight partisan votes. If it's going to be on most gun safety legislation, you have straight partisan votes, except for background checks. We do have some Republicans that now do support universal background checks legislation, so that is possible of being signed into law. So I think it does depend on the issue.
Thank you. And Janet's asking, she says, climate change is an international issue. What do you think Congress should do in the next session on climate issues? And do you support the Green New Deal proposals?
I do support the Green New Deal. As you may know, the Green New Deal is, it's basically a resolution. It doesn't sort of have any provisions in there. So if it became law, nothing would actually happen. It just sort of says, here's things we'd like to see. So I introduced legislation when I first became a member of Congress. The first bill I wrote and introduced was the Climate Solutions Act, and it's modeled on California's AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, of which I was a co-author. And I think the reason the California climate change law worked well is we didn't go out and say, hey, here is 971 things we want you to do to mitigate climate change. It basically set goals, and then it gave an agency immense power to take us there. So in California's case, it was the California Air Resources Board. They have immense power to issue regulations and to take all sorts of actions. So my bill is similar. It sets goals, and then it gives the EPA and the Department of Energy the power to take us there. I think climate change is something that we absolutely have to work on immediately, and also with a new administration, I believe they would get us back into the Paris Climate Accords as well.
Do you think that in this moment with the pandemic and the way that our whole society has been kind of thrown up into the air and has yet to land back down, both the economy and our health and our well-being and the environment, do you think that that creates new opportunities for addressing climate change faster than we might otherwise have been able to do so? Because we've been so stuck.
Right. That's an interesting question. I think on some other issues, it's definitely created those opportunities, such as police reform and also healthcare. So I happen to support Medicare for all, but regardless of one's view on it, I think there has been a shift in how people view healthcare, where a lot more Americans understand now how important it is and why we need to fix our broken healthcare system. So a poll came out not too long ago showing that 44% of Republicans support Medicare for all. That's pretty astounding. And so I think there is movement to fix our healthcare system, and this pandemic has shown that there is a huge disparate impact on certain groups of people. So we know that African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, and Asian Pacific Islanders, as well as people who are in poverty, die at far higher rates from COVID-19. And so we have to just fix these healthcare disparities because it's resulting in loss of life.
Yeah, thank you. We support you in doing that work. I want to ask one more question before we wrap up, which is, we would be remiss as a Jewish organization in this country not to speak with you about what's happening right now in Israel. And we are so concerned about the possibility that Israel will go forward with this annexation of parts of the West Bank. And while there are different points of view within our community, many of us are deeply worried about what this will do to Israel, what it will do to human rights in Israel and for the Palestinian people. And we're wondering what you think Congress can do and will do, and what you see happening on that front in the next 6 months or so.
Sure. I think annexation would be a bad idea. It's why I signed on to a congressional letter opposing annexation. Ultimately, we're going to need a two-state solution. I think annexation would bring us further away from a two-state solution. We need to continue to have a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. That doesn't mean that we need to agree with everything the Israeli government is doing. And so you have a number of members of Congress now who are expressing their views that the Israeli government should not go forward with annexation.
Thank you. Well, again, we share your view on that and want you to know that you have the backing of us and really the vast majority of the Jewish community in this country and certainly in Los Angeles for working towards a two-state solution and for calling on Israel to live up to its democratic values and to respect the human rights of all the people who live under the control of its government. So thank you for that. So Congressman, it's almost 6 o'clock and we don't want to take any more of your time than you'd agreed to give us. But we just want to thank you for the work that you're doing in Congress and to let you know how much we value the relationship with you. We look forward to continuing to work with you on the issues that we care about as a community, including especially racial justice and climate justice. And we're so deeply concerned about all of the work that you're doing together with other members of Congress to help make change along those issues. And so we want to thank you so much for your time and look forward to continuing to talk with you in the future. Do you want to share any last words with us?
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for being on this call. I thought I'd just end with a few words of hope about this pandemic. I had the chance to talk to Dr. Patrick Song-Shion a few weeks ago. Some of you may know he has been a leader in the biotech industry. He's come up with some amazing cancer cures. And his company's issued a press release not too long ago that had some pretty promising results on a vaccine candidate. Now we know that Oxford scientists have had some good results with their vaccine candidate. We know that the company Moderna has had some good results with their vaccine candidate. We don't just have the best and brightest people in the world, people in the U.S. working on this. We have people in the world all working on this one issue, which is finding a cure or a drug therapy for COVID-19. So my view is we're going to get there sooner rather than later. And with that, thank you for having me and look forward to continuing working with all of you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I just want to let our folks know that we've got another Know Your Reps conversation coming up with State Senator Holly Mitchell. So we invite you to join us for that. Please look for it on our calendar. And thank you so much, Congressman Liu. Thanks for your time. Bye,
Great.
everybody.
Have a good evening.